be back here.
Yeah, what we're doing here is informal conversations. Although I don't know if I've ever had a formal conversation in my life. I think most of my conversations are informal. And even though we sort of went a little bit deeper into what prediction health is, it's also been a few months, and I know the speed of technology and healthcare is going faster. But let's not run before we walk. What's your background, and then we'll get to prediction health. So who are you, and what's your superhero backstory?
Superhero. That might be overstating it, unless it's like my nerd superhero backstory.
We like nerd superhero. The world is changed by nerds.
I'll take it, right? MD, PhD. Met my co-founder, Robbie, who's running around here, and he's a delight, back at Vanderbilt, 2009. And we just were really excited about computers in medicine to help patients. And that was kind of like the vague idea at the time. And as we sort of got to learn how to take care of patients and everything, we saw that there's a lot of tech and tools that aren't really designed with that clinical understanding. And if you don't understand the workflow, you can get kind of in the way and be a lot more friction, and then clinicians don't want to use it, and then anything your tool is trying to do, you're not going to get there, right? So we were really excited to really think from the clinical perspective and figure out how do we integrate it as things that people love to use. And one way to make people really love stuff is to get friction out of their way. And so documentation is something that people don't love. And so we sort of went through that vision of could we build AI models to listen in and take that documentation burden away, but then also to remember and do all the reviewing all the previous charts stuff that you can't do for every single patient, right? So 2017, we started that as our crazy startup. So almost 8 years now.
I'm doing the math. You saw me count on my fingers. But I discovered AI a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago. And I think a lot of people are still might be saying, okay, finally I've heard it 100 times, I'll do it. That's a long time ago to be sort of, connecting the dots.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, we were in it way before it was cool.
Because it is cool. It is terribly cool right now. Look what this can do. And it's sort of a toy or a tool that you can say, hey, I wonder if it could do this, and then you can just test it. But back then, how'd you have access? I'm just curious. Where did you go? Who was touching AI 7-8 years ago?
It was kind of in the early phase. It was really kind of rocketing up. But the tech, again, was really early, which is why it sort of took so many years. We went into that space, and we wanted to be able to generate a really high-quality note in seconds and put it right into your EMR, which finally, we've gotten there. But for a long time, the models were not sophisticated enough to do that problem really well. So we had humans at some stage. We found physical therapy compliance challenges and CPT coding as these points of friction where our models worked really, really well for that. And so that's why we're a little bit more analytics focused for a couple of years. But then this last year or so, year and a half, really started seeing the technology taking off, did a lot more fine tuning, and got to build on that finally to come full circle to the idea of getting into the workflow to make things that people love to use, and then in the background having this more advanced model stuff running to help with practice optimization and coding and compliance, right?
I sort of alluded to, it was sort of similar. There was a Hulk TV show back in the 70s, right? They painted Lou Ferrigno green, right? And there was a Thor movie where the guy ran around with the helmet, right? And finally, the computers caught up to the imagination. So what if we should be able to? Wouldn't it be great if it wasn't really there in the beginning? But kudos to you guys, because you said, I think when this gets better, faster, smaller, whatever, it will be there. It will be able to do that thing. So I think the people who planted seeds in 2017 are now saying, we sort of called it, we were playing with it before it was cool. So now describe specifically, if someone is walking around, as a lot of people do here at APTA's PPS, what do you guys do? How does it make my life better?
So from the therapist perspective, either on your laptop, on an iPad, mobile device, right? You're going to go in, you're going to see the patient, and you have your EMR usually kind of with you, or maybe not, right? And you start recording, and you have that conversation with the person you're going to have anyway, but we're listening and processing in the background, summarizing, taking out all the small talk that you're going to do, right? And then generate that objective assessment plan, goals, intervention stuff, right, too, in the background. So then you have a draft. When you go back to your EMR, you're not going back and forth and getting distracted and I'm not looking at you, right? Instead, you get that whole draft available for you, reminding you of stuff that you maybe were going to document when you got back to it, but maybe you kind of forget because maybe it's 2 a.m. or whenever you're catching up. And just stop and you accept it, and it's integrated right into the EMR view.
But you get one more touch point before it's accepted. That's what a lot of people were asking. Well, I don't want it to just write my note for me. It's it's doing what you said, a draft, a good first pass.
Yeah. When we very intentionally design things, with that sort of like, what is the workflow in real clinics like, right? You're going to get distracted, you're going to get pulled away. So we have a review step for each section. So subjective, you eyeball it, and if you need to tweak it or something, you can. But you also, if it looks good, you click, and then that section goes in. And if you get pulled away before you get to your assessment, you come back, it's ready, it's sitting there, right? And you just like review it really quick and accept section by section.
So for people watching and listening, Prediction Health, are you an EMR or what do you consider yourself?
We're like we're a sidekick, right? So
Yeah.
it's Prediction Health sidekick because it's like an adjunct. It's like a helpful buddy, right? There, but integrate into the tools that you're already using, right? You don't want to have two things open or use a new piece of technology or like add another piece of hardware that you're going to carry around. You're already doing so much stuff as a clinician that we just try to really streamline. So we try really hard to get to the point like one button click, like one start, one stop in whatever you're already using, even if it's, all these different devices that we've been adding support for, just really trying to meet people where they are.
Objections, right? Because people at PPS, I'm not going to call people out CSM, but are pretty pragmatic. Like, because a lot of times the people that come to PPS are the people who are writing the checks. This looks really cute, right? But I got to pay for it, and then I got to make sure this makes its money back, and then some, because this is my time, my effort, my staff is. I don't want them to be annoyed. What are one or two objections you're constantly hearing, and then what are your sort of, hey, we've thought of that, responses to them?
For sure. So folks will ask a lot about, well, what about the audio quality? Like, because you're in a gym and you're doing exercise.
Here we are right here with this.
This is a great example. And actually, right, as you are sort of showing, the audio quality is getting a lot better. You've got audio cleaning and normalization in there that helps a lot. And the models themselves have gotten bigger and smarter and better at not only having like that audio and processing it to like understand what's going on, but also to think about what are they saying in the audio.
Filtering out the words that don't need,
Exactly,
that aren't moving the needle.
Or like things that sound similarly, there's all these like acronyms, HEP, right? Like, okay, you hear that and it's like, oh yeah, it's the letters HEP.
Right.
But like the models actually understand like that is the home exercise plan and it makes sense to do in this context.
Right.
So.
Or, I mean, I don't know, if you had two different motions that a body part might do, like abduction and adduction, why not just make those words as close as possible in sound and spelling so we could easily get confused? All right, so how does the sound work? Good, you've got that solved. Another objection that you're constantly hearing, or question that you're constantly getting from practice owners?
So they'll be like, oh, well, like, am I gonna have to copy paste this? Or am I like, is this gonna really make sense for me? Or how much friction?
Another step.
Yeah, like another step. And so again, like we're really thinking about how we make this a one-click thing, how we integrate it into the EMR you're already using so that it's just right there, right? You open it up, you go in, and of course there's WebPT and Prompt and all these different companies, Insight Go, right? Just build it right in so that it's not another thing you have to do. You just go into the EMR and it's sitting there ready to help you, but not making you distracted by having to go into another tech. So that one's a really big one too.
So it is one more thing you have to do, but that is hit record.
Yeah, you hit record, but it's sitting in that EMR view. So like you're looking at the EMR and it's right in the bottom right corner and it just says like record, stop, and then it'll show up either right underneath the boxes, because different EMRs are different, or right up there on the side. So you can scan it, and if you like it, it's one click to accept a section.
When I was practicing in a clinic, if you had said, if you come over to my house and mow my lawn once a week, I'll write all your notes, I would have done it twice a week. So hitting record doesn't feel like the largest lift to have to take. What's maybe one final objection or question that you guys get from practice owners?
We get a lot of questions around like, are my therapists going to like use it? Is it going to be confusing? Some folks are less technology oriented, and there's usually a lot of concern like, oh, they don't like computers. But because we've really, really simplified it and integrated into the system they're already using, you have like this one little barrier of like, when you start talking to the patient, hit this button, and then once they see that result, and the fact that then they just accept the stuff that they like, we see a lot of our like most happy, excited users are those folks who are not techie at all, but now because they hit that one button at the beginning, they don't have to do all of that clicking and typing for everything else.
Who I was just talking to one of your marketing people. What's her name?
Julie.
Julie. Now, I'm not telling Julie what to do, but in radio, I knew when the microphone was on because there was an on-air light. So maybe like treatment in progress or treatment going on that you could integrate Wi-Fi, Bluetooth. So whenever you're sitting at my table, I'll make sure, yep, I'm recording there because I know the light is on. How do patients, or how have you heard patients react to this? Because the first couple times you go through anything, I remember 7 or 8 years ago, I went to a new provider, and she had another person in the room, and she introduced her as her scribe, right? The sidekick. And she had to do this kind of spiel, like she's here to sort of like, do all the things so I can do this. So how are patients sort of reacting to this new application of technology?
we see like very high, like high 90% acceptance of patients for it. And what they really love and they call out is that the person's not looking back and forth from a computer. They're zoned in, right, to that patient, and they're getting that attention. And the other really cool thing that you see is once the therapist really embraces that they're like going to talk and that their note's going to get done, they start doing things in a little bit more of like a thorough way and an educational way, which the patient then gets more attention and more focus on their time, right? That like 10 minutes that you would have been typing to keep up on your initial eval, you're just locked in on that person and explaining, here's what I want to accomplish with you. Here's what I'm thinking about for your treatment. Here's our goals together. You get more time to form rapport, more time to like gather information and answer questions, and all of that audio automatically, when appropriate, fills in more content from your note. So it's more thorough, it's a better, more compliant note, and you get to do the thing you actually like to do as a clinician, right? Focus on the patient. So, yeah.
I use artificial intelligence. Tony and I will use it. We'll record a live stream, but now I've got to make it a podcast. What's the title of this episode? Let me think of a really good SEO quality title, and then I don't want to spend time thinking of it. So I've trained a GPT to say, you're my podcast producer. I'm going to feed you a transcript, and when you're done, I want you to do these 5 things. I've recorded solo videos where I've said, in the recording, I've talked to Al, right? Where I've said, hey, make sure we include this in the SEO, and it's embedded in the conversation. So you can start to, imagine, I would start to treat it like a scribe, like an assistant, and say, hey, make sure we give Mr. Johnson the TheraBand on the way out because he said he didn't have any, and that would pop up somewhere else.
Yeah, really like diving into that, like, again, the idea of sidekick, right? Like you're doing the physical exam and you're going to call out your range of motions, but then also you just mentioned like, hey, like this means that, you're not having as much flexion on this side compared to this side, and here's what we're going to do about it. Well, okay, again, education for the patient, but the system's listening in, and now that's going to get incorporated into your assessment, right? So I love that you mentioned too the ChatGPT thing, because we have a little feature called our Ask AI, which is like a ChatGPT that is HIPAA compliant, that can also see the EMR data, that you can, again, do certain things like if you have a letter to update to the physician, right, that referred to you, you can get that letter quickly.
Write a first pass letter of medical necessity, blah, blah, blah.
Just like the podcast, right, that you have as a challenge to do too, and sitting there, again, where you're not going into potentially a non-HIPAA compliant technology to put stuff, but again, just trying to be really helpful and useful to make a lot of that documentation craziness, go down so you can focus on patients.
Yeah, and that was going to be we had just done an interview with an EMR company, and that was the thing. Compliant, 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 user-friendly, user-friendly, user-friendly. If you can tackle those 2 things, do you make my life better? And do you make sure that I didn't skip something or I'm vulnerable to something? You now have my attention. So you sort of paid attention to the future 7 years ago, right? 2017, which seems like a million years ago. And you saw this. And you don't have to give away secrets, right? But you can if you want to. But what's something that maybe we're not even thinking about? Like people who are just geeking out on playing with AI and getting it to write, love notes and the theme of Dr. Seuss to our girlfriends. What's something we're not even thinking about that's coming?
So folks kind of joke sometimes that AI is getting so clever, we're not going to have anything to do. And I completely disagree with that.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. I think that as you're getting more technology, more advanced, that there's an infinite number of things you're going to want to do, right? There's going to be more and more to do and fewer excuses on why you can't do it, right? We do stuff today that like 2-3 years ago would have been such a pain, and we would have had to spend a bunch of time learning how to do stuff, and now we just ask the AI and we get the crash course on how to do it, right? So going forward, I think that this is really just the beginning. Like you finally got high enough that it's something people can use in their day-to-day, but for everything that we've seen for building technology, the second you get it to that threshold where you're delivering value and people are using it day-to-day, you can just iterate and improve it so fast now that you're going to have useful warnings, when you're with the patient. You're going to have the systems processing piles and piles of data and then giving you customized recommendations that are not, and I have to emphasize this because it's really important, but they're not superseding your judgment as a clinician. They're just providing stuff that, they're sidekicking, right? They're like, hey, did you know you might want this? You might want to look at this? Like, hey, reminder, in this packet of materials over here, they talked about getting an MRI and an X-ray that showed these things that happens to be relevant to some decisions you're making right now. And so really empowering clinicians to make the best decision by like bringing this massive data processing powers of AI and computers to just give you the useful stuff that like otherwise you're not going to look at 30 minutes of like catching up on all this stuff, right? And so really excited about that improvement of care quality with the continued advancement of these models.
Much like your logo, right? Connecting those dots that without this tool would have taken too long, or maybe you would have missed that thing.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like a little neural networky thing, but also like a graph showing like pulling together a bunch of stuff, which is kind of abstract and silly. But we kind of just picked it those years ago and have stuck with it since.
I like it. Well done. Last thing we do is a parting shot. Unless you got anything, is there anything you missed or anything you want to ask?
You guys talk about the analytics.
Oh yeah, analytics, right? So the devil's in the details. It's all in the data. That can get overwhelming, right? Again, if I'm with a patient, I'm not looking at KPIs, but it does that too?
Yeah, so in that sort of like phase of us transitioning into like PT, it was because we were pulled in there by compliance, CPT coding, and we're data nerds, and EMRs, they focus on a lot of different things. Sometimes they don't focus on the analytics part, right? And they don't have AI models that can read all of your notes to find like, oh, well, very concretely, here's things that you could do to reduce your compliance risk, to get more functional activities, which are associated with better outcomes too, right? So we have a whole dashboard that runs periodically, refreshes your data with all of the notes that all of your therapists across all your clinics have been doing, right? Where the AI is reading every single word right in those notes and then showing you like, hey, you don't have to go review 100 charts to find like 20 charts that are like a little questionable to then go talk to people. We're just going to show you that like 20% where they could use a little bit of help, and you take all of your effort now and focus on actually just improving education, maybe giving them sidekick to help them out with some things, because it does help. And that's the whole sort of thing we have in the background. That's the foundation for sidekick. We built it on this, tens of millions of cases and all this compliance and CPT coding work because we didn't want to just generate a note. We want to generate a really good, thorough, compliant note that's coded appropriately with an appropriate mix of functional activities and make it a very comprehensive offering.
I heard two things. I don't remember where I heard it from, so I'm really good with quotes and information. But I can't remember. But the idea was PTs or healthcare professionals will complain. We don't get compensated enough, right? So we don't get paid enough, and we are required to do too much documentation. And then I heard they reviewed 1 million cases or whatever it was, and they said you're actually doing more and not asking for the thing. You're not actually billing for the thing you did, and the requirement for documentation is here, and you're actually doing here. So you're doing too much and not asking for to be paid for the value you delivered. Is that close? Was that right?
That was potentially one of our presentations last year.
Might have been it.
A slide that I did on the sweet spot. And you can see that like as you add more and more words, you get to a point where like it's not going to make it a more compliant note. You're just writing a story, and so it's about 5,000 characters. So like every single key, right? If you get to 5,000, above that, you really don't see that much additional improvement. But you had some people doing 20,000 characters, right? You have people like writing mini novels, almost, where they're not getting an additional benefit, they're just spending a lot of time. So we also have an over-documentation metric in the interface.
So that person, and I know this, or I'm guessing this from their emotion, they're like, well, if I write more, I'll be more safe. And I've heard from experts in billing, they're saying, actually, the more you write, the more you actually might give a reason to be flagged. So I don't have to document this much. I'm over-documenting by 75%. And in what I did, I probably could get reimbursed more, but I didn't actually bill for it because I wanted to make sure I didn't get audited. That's all I heard as a student. Make sure everything's defensible.
Yeah. So there's that feedback we have in the analytics platform to show people like, hey, like very literally, your HPIs are 80% of the time way over documented, to give them an objective feedback, right? And your audit score is already at 92. So you're already doing really great. Like don't worry about it. You can spend less time there. But then additionally, you can do that education with people using the analytics tools, but the really nice thing is if it automatically just does the right thing. So when Sidekick's just listening in, you can do an hour-long in-depth visit, but it's sort of picking out the appropriate amount of content and just kind of are automatically deciding that for you. So it's just like two different ways to do it, and one way just being more aware of how much is really necessary and having an objective measure that always is the same, with how it's evaluating your notes over time. So as you sort of like maybe cut back a little bit on the note, you still feel confident that it's a defensible note. But then again, also Sidekick's sort of like that next step for us, where the robot just takes even more of that workload off of you, where it's going to write not a tome. It's going to write an appropriately sized, compliant note.
Do less and feel better about knowing that what you're doing is right.
Exactly.
Last thing we do on the show is called the parting shot. So what's a mic drop moment, soapbox statement, anything that you want to leave as we wrap up?
I think it's just so rewarding to get feedback from therapists. They're taking care of patients, and we've had a couple people that are like kind of in tears, just saying like, this makes me appreciate like being here, taking care of patients so much again, because there's all this stuff coming in and distracting me from the thing that I really love. And 75% of their documentation time cut out that they now get to put towards what brought them into the industry.
Right.
And that's just so motivating for us. And it's like, the 8 years, like I do it, another 8 years, no problem, for that kind of reward and feedback. So
We want to make sure people can get there. I'm sure if everybody's just going to Google Prediction Health, but where would you want to send them? What's the website?
yeah, it's predictionhealth.com. So
Smart.
Well,
Smart website.
we managed to secure that one back in the early days.
Very smart. Very
That was
smart.
good. That was good. There's a little story, but I'll tell you some other time.
All right,
But
that
it was
sounds
good.
great. Pedro, I appreciate what you're doing. From the story you just told me, it sounds like you're removing the thing that made someone's job suck, and now they get to do that job longer, better, and change more lives. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's it.